Good afternoon, everybody. This is Bonnie Vandermeulen, Training Coordinator for Wisconsin FACETS. On behalf of the entire Wisconsin FACETS staff, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. Today, our webinar is entitled RDA Results Driven Accountability, Success Through Literacy, What Parents Need to Know. The RDA is a new focus from the Federal Office of Special Education Programs that balances special education compliance with outcomes for students with disabilities. In Wisconsin, we are focusing on literacy outcomes, so we are calling RDA Reading Drives Achievement Success Through Literacy. Today, our presenter for our webinar is Julia Hartwig. Julia is the Assistant Director of Special Education at the Wisconsin DPI. She has received a general education teaching licensure and degree in psychology from the University of Iowa and a master's degree in teaching and a licensure in special education from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Prior to coming to the special education team at the DPI, she was a special education teacher. Julia held that position on the School Improvement Initiatives consultant on the special education team for 5 years. It is my pleasure today to introduce to you Julia Hartwig. Julia?
Hi, thanks, Bonnie. Hi, everybody. So as Bonnie said, I'm one of the assistant directors on the special education team here at DPI, and my work focuses on kind of broad systems within education with a particular focus on special education, but kind of how special education and general education come together in a whole systems approach to further outcomes, particularly for students with disabilities. So a lot of this work around this focus on outcomes for students with disabilities falls under my purview, but there are strong connections, and I'll talk about that throughout the presentation, to all that we do here, even the compliance sorts of things that we're responsible for. So this new shift toward results is really kind of an overarching theme on all the work that we're going to do going forward. So again, this presentation will be about results-driven accountability, or RDA, and as you can see from the title slide, we've sort of retooled the RDA acronym to be Reading Drives Achievements. We're still using RDA, but our state is focusing on literacy or reading. So we have this Reading Drives Achievement Success Through Literacy sort of subtitle, and I'll get into that a little bit more and how we arrived at that decision. So backing up a little bit, if you have questions throughout, feel free to type them in, and we'll get to them mostly at the end. I'll be sure to save some time at the end. But to be sure that we get through everything, we're going to save most of the questions till the end. And if there are certain questions that are particularly relevant to a particular slide I'm on or something like that, Bonnie will be monitoring the questions and may interject with those. So RDA, what is it? So it's special education accountability based on compliance and results. So in the past, historically, the Office of Special Education Programs, or OSEP, which is housed in the Federal Department of Education, has held states accountable for compliance-related aspects of IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or special education. They are shifting to now focus an equal amount on compliance as results or outcomes for students with disabilities. So while outcomes has always sort of been the heart of special education and the reason why students receive special education support, states have never been held accountable for that. It's never been the focus of monitoring and whatnot at the federal level. And so because the Federal Office of Special Education Programs are holding states accountable now, states in turn have to develop a system for holding districts within their states accountable for outcomes for students with disabilities, as well as continue to hold them accountable for compliance-related measures. So it's truly a balanced approach and a really great movement toward focusing on real rich outcomes for students with disabilities. So you may be aware that how the Federal Office of Special Education Programs kind of monitors or uses data to monitor progress of states is through indicators. So there are compliance-related indicators and outcome-related indicators. So the three lines at the top of this graph that you're seeing are some of our compliance-related indicators around early childhood, transition outcomes, our general monitoring, and you can see that we do really well on those indicators. And this is a national trend. By and large, states do really well on those compliance indicators. The two lines down at the bottom of this graph, however, are reading and math performance. It's a little bit old data, but the trend continues. You can see we don't do so well on reading and math outcomes, and this is particularly data for achievement for students with disabilities on our statewide assessment. And this is also true nationally. So it's pretty clear data that indicates there is a need for a shift, that states are doing a really good job on compliance measures, and we want to maintain those high levels of compliance, so we're not shifting away from that focus, but there's a clear indicator here that we need to focus on outcomes. So here's some Wisconsin data. That was also Wisconsin data. And these two kind of buckets, the blue reading and the green math, represent 100 students each, students with disabilities who are proficient or advanced on the statewide assessment in various grades. So these are 100 students. This shows the number of students with disabilities proficient or advanced on the statewide assessment in each of these subject areas in grade 3. This is grade 4, grade 5, grade 6, seven, 8, and 10. So you can see when we were looking at what area to focus on in Wisconsin under this new RDA focus, we knew that these were unacceptable trends. So some states are focusing on, for example, graduation. Some are focusing on various other outcome-related measures. We knew that we really wanted to focus on an academic area. We heard that really loud and clear from many stakeholders. And when we were comparing reading and math, the reading scores went down earlier for students with disabilities. And also our stakeholders told us that reading is really a very high leverage content area that sort of is pervasive in many other areas of results. So we also looked at this data, and you know, it's just an unacceptable trend. This graph really helps to kind of put a little bit more of a face on achievement for students with disabilities here in Wisconsin. And so we have a really strong focus in reading. However, we don't want to focus so laser-like on reading or literacy that we forget about the whole child. I'll talk more about that going forward. Here we have, and I'm going to connect to our website here, a short overview video that talks about results-driven accountability.
By this time, you've probably heard about something called RDA, and you may be wondering how this acronym relates to actual students. Here's Erica. She has a disability. Maybe it's a learning disability, a developmental delay, or maybe she experiences challenges in the emotional behavioral arena. But like many students with disabilities in Wisconsin, she's not reading as well as we'd like her to. Her family and her teacher know that literacy is essential to her quality of life after high school. They want to see her apply for jobs, write emails, add her voice to our democracy. Erica's enrolled in special education, and her school follows the rules for special ed to help her get to success. In the past, those rules amounted to making sure certain actions were taken by the school. But there was never any guarantee that these steps were the only ones needed to actually make the difference for this particular student. That's the thinking behind RDA. It's a federal initiative that stands for Results-Driven Accountability. Now Erica's ability to read is a requirement in and of itself. Schools have a responsibility to make sure that measurable learning really happens for students with disabilities. In Wisconsin, we're focusing on literacy, so we think of RDA as reading drives achievement. Whatever you call it, it really just means insisting on high expectations for students with disabilities, like we do for all other students. The focus on students' learning meshes with lots of other initiatives happening today. In fact, the DPI's special education team has formed new partnerships with various education efforts around the RDA goal, and it's part of the special ed team's new way of doing business. So you can count on hearing more about it, and there will be opportunities to seek support. If you're a teacher, you might wonder if there's anything you're expected to do differently because of RDA. Good news. The best way for schools to succeed in this new world is to use those same best practices many educators are already trying to employ for students with disabilities. Universal design for learning, strong literacy instruction, culturally responsive curriculum, meaningful access to grade-level standards-based education, strategies for family engagement, collaboration between special and general educators, a multi-level system of support, and positive behavioral interventions and support. Everyone loves to see a student with disabilities open up options for their future. Beyond that, schools will also like to see gains on their school report cards. And teachers will see themselves make progress toward any of their educator effectiveness goals that relate to students' outcomes in special education.
By working together, I know that we can increase literacy for our students with disabilities here in Wisconsin.
This is a great opportunity for a new focus on outcomes and results and opportunities and supports for our kids with disabilities. Let's do this.
Okay, so on the website that I connected to, that's a link within there, there's some other general information that we'll continue to update over time. That provides you just kind of a little bit of a general overview.
Thank you very much.
Oh,
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
I think that the next
I'm a 20-year
video came on YouTube. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to take us kind of to a 10,000-foot view here and talk about, from a federal perspective, what OSEP is focusing on around RDA. So they have kind of three main components of results-driven accountability. One of them is what they call determinations. So every year, OSEP issues determinations of states, whether states meet expectations, they need assistance, etc. In turn, states issue determinations to districts, whether they meet expectations, need assistance, etc. Every state in the past has met determinations, has met expectations, because again, those were based solely on compliance. OSEP shifted their focus and determinations over the past couple of years to, again, weigh 50-50 results and compliance. Wisconsin has met expectations the past couple of years, but their criteria keeps getting more rigorous. So we also need to become more rigorous in our outcome data. The second thing that they're focusing on is our state performance plan, or annual performance report, sometimes called SPP/APR. Within that, so this is where we report all of our data related to all of the indicators, both compliance and outcomes. They've added another indicator that is what they're calling our State Systemic Improvement Plan, or OSEP. Of course, we have a number of new acronyms with this new initiative. And within that State Systemic Improvement Plan, Wisconsin and every state are required to outline improvement strategies to address our area of focus. So over the past couple of years, we've gone through a data analysis process, an infrastructure analysis process, brought a lot of people to the table to determine an area of focus, as well as identify some improvement strategies. And I'll get into what those improvement strategies are in a couple of slides. So that's kind of their second area of focus. Their third area of focus is differentiated monitoring and support. So OSEP used to provide monitoring to states just on a regular scheduled basis. Now they're providing supports to states based on need. So we're going to provide some supports to districts in a similar fashion. We're going to continue providing some monitoring on a cyclical basis, but also some additional supports to districts who, based on their data, need additional support. So then bringing it back to Wisconsin, through a stakeholder process, we determined a number of values within Wisconsin's RDA system. So these were things that our stakeholders told us that we wanted to be sure to keep central to this system. First and foremost is family engagement. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a couple of slides as well. Some ideas for meaningful family engagement in this process. Cultural responsiveness. Again, when we're talking about outcomes for students, we want systems and curriculum and relationships to be engaging, to be relevant, to be meaningful for all of our students. Effective educators using research-based approaches. So we want to be sure that we're providing rich, research-based professional learning experiences for our educators so that they can change their practice to reach higher outcomes, to help students reach higher outcomes. Early intervention, and here I see this as kind of twofold. One, we know that starting with early childhood is very important in building foundational literacy skills as well as social emotional skills and many other skills. So intervening and providing supports for our little ones we think is very important. Also with early intervention throughout the child's educational experience at first sign of struggle to provide support so that there isn't this, it isn't that we're waiting for a student to fail to provide support. You're likely familiar with response to intervention or a multi-level system of support, and that kind of system sets up that just-in-time system to respond to student needs. Positive and proactive social emotional supports. I alluded to this earlier, that we want to be sure that we're focusing not too intensely on reading, that we are forgetting about the needs of children in general. There's an inextricable connection between social emotional supports, behavior, and academics. And we can't lose sight of the fact that the social emotional supports are extremely important to success in general. So we want to focus on that as well. And then a systems-wide approach. So this also means a couple of different things, that increasing literacy outcomes for students with disabilities is not the responsibility of special education alone, nor is it the responsibility of general education alone, nor any one kind of individual or category of staff, that this is truly a systems-wide approach, that the education of all students needs to be owned by all. Also that this isn't one grade level. This isn't early childhood only or elementary only or high school only. It's truly a systems-wide approach. I wanted to bring your attention to this college and career readiness flyer here. You've maybe heard a lot about college and career ready. Our State Superintendent Tony Evers' platform is Every Child a Graduate, College and Career Ready. And so the department has taken some time over the past year or two to articulate what that really means, what it really means for a Wisconsin student to graduate college and career ready. And you'll see in the green box on the left that it says all students in Wisconsin graduate from high school academically prepared and socially and emotionally competent by possessing and demonstrating the various knowledge, skills, and habits. And so when we're talking about the supports that we provide for students with disabilities, we're using this same platform to figure out how we provide support so that all of our students can get to the point where they're acquiring this knowledge, skills, and habits. What I always say is there isn't a separate glossy one-pager for what it means for students with disabilities to be college and career ready. This is what it means for Wisconsin students to be college and career ready. So yes, it's about academic preparedness. It's also about skills such as critical thinking and grit and communication. It's also about habits such as responsibility and leadership and self-advocacy. So we use this as sort of foundational for what it means, kind of what our North Star is and where we're going. So in going back, this is actually a slide from OSEP as well that shows just kind of the cycle of the phases of what's required for results-driven accountability, particularly related to our SIP, or that State Systemic Improvement Plan that every state is required to submit on an annual basis. So you can see over on the right side was phase 1, where we did the data analysis. We kind of identified what the problem was. We identified why it was happening, and then identified what we should do about it. So we're now in this process of outlining action steps and a more concrete plan for what we should do about it. So now I'll get into what those improvement strategies are. So the first improvement strategy, what we're calling a coordinated, or maybe sometimes we say a comprehensive district improvement planning process. So we're working really closely, when I say we, I mean the special education team is working very closely with it, particularly the Title I team here at DPI, to provide a coordinated support system. So this is, in particular, this improvement strategy is in response to a lot of feedback we were hearing from districts, in that there are times when we from DPI require duplicative reporting, improvement processes, professional development, etc., that it ends up being undue burden on districts. And so we're streamlining our processes so that districts can really focus on improving and developing their own improvement plans and improvement strategies that are highly aligned, that focus on outcomes, and that hopefully require less kind of rigmarole for DPI, so that they can focus on what truly matters, which is outcomes for students. They can align their professional development, etc. So we're going to provide some supports that are universally available for them to do that. And then for identified districts who, based on their data, need more assistance in this area, we'll provide some more guided assistance on this through coaching, etc. The second improvement strategy is around the development and dissemination of professional learning resources. So we know that if we're going to change outcomes, we need to change adult practices first before we can change student outcomes. So we're either developing or leveraging existing resources that are focused on, you can see a number of the things that we're focused on here. This list could kind of go on, but some of the things are around co-teaching. We know that there's some good research to support co-teaching, but there's oftentimes not a lot of support or clear vision on how to implement co-teaching in the most effective way, so we want to provide some supports around that. UDL stands for Universal Design for Learning, so providing students multiple options for engagement, for interacting with the curriculum, for assessing their knowledge, so that not everybody is necessarily having to take that paper and pencil test if they're assessing knowledge in, for example, a science concept. If we want to know what the science that a student grasps the science concept, to provide multiple opportunities for showing that in the student's preferred manner. CCR IEP stands for College and Career Ready IEPs. I'm going to get into that actually a little bit more in depth in the next slide, so I'm going to skip that for now. Literacy specific PD. PD stands for Professional Development. Of course, if we are talking about increasing literacy outcomes, we need to have literacy specific professional development. So we work very closely with our general education team here to provide a continuum of supporting resources. We really want to emphasize a connection to grade level standards-based curriculum and instruction. So we are working very closely with our general educators on that. FBA toolkit, functional behavioral assessment toolkit, as well as a mental health toolkit. So again, linking behavioral and mental health and social emotional support. Children with IEPs within a multi-level system of support or an RTI system guidance. So what does that look like? And I think that we've had that question a lot. So within an RTI system, where does a student's specially designed instruction fit? Where does the rest of a student's instructional experience fit? So we're going to be providing some more concrete guidance around that. So lots of things that are in development or that we're leveraging related to professional learning. The third main improvement strategy is connections to compliance, or I like to say compliance for the purpose of results. So again, this college and career ready IEPs, so literacy focused, both procedural compliance self-assessment or our monitoring process, and new sample forms. And again, I'm going to get into that a little bit more on the next slide. I think I had fun little arrows here that I haven't been using, so let me click through those. This will allow me to proceed. Our final improvement strategy is around coaching. So our state personnel development grant has coaching infused throughout all of the programming. We employ coaches through that project to provide support to school teams. We'll be shifting to the district level. Our RTI Center has a wonderful series of professional learning for coaches to increase their leadership and coaching skills. We'd like to establish regional implementation teams to help districts who are identified in their specific region through this process of improvement. And then the internal and external model. And by that I mean having an external coach is wonderful, but we know that to sustain practices on a long-term basis, we need to have leadership on the inside or internal to a district or school be identified as that coach. So coaching has a lot of research behind its effectiveness. We know that coaching is a critical component when a school team receives professional development in a certain area. The implementation of that specific strategy or approach or initiative is much more likely to actually be implemented well, and implemented in a sustained fashion if coaching is part of that model. So we truly want to focus on coaching as kind of a cornerstone of implementation. Okay, so here's that slide I was talking about related to college and career ready IEPs. And I think that this might be of particular interest for families because of the involvement on an ongoing basis within IEPs. So we want to be sure, and on this slide it sort of depicts both procedural on the left side and then best practices on the right side. So we have sort of the compliance and kind of meeting the letter of the law related to IEP development and implementation on the left side, and then we also want to kind of go above and beyond meeting the letter of the law through the best practices on the right side. So through the left side here, we have the new RDA procedural compliance self-assessment and revised sample forms. So the actual products of and sample forms from DPI for IEP teams, for IEPs, both evaluation and IEP development, have been revamped to include a greater focus on college and career readiness, a greater focus on literacy. So items that we felt and that stakeholders felt were most closely connected to outcomes, particularly in the area of literacy, are the items that are now the focus of those materials. There's a strong focus on linking the present levels to goals, linking goals to specific services that are provided. So really providing kind of a big picture and a cohesive picture of what students need related to their disability and how to get them to their next level of success based on their goals. So the guidance is really focused on how to do that in a way that it didn't used to be. On the right side, they're in development right now are best practice modules related to IEP development. So these two, the content of these two mesh very well, and that best practices content goes into a lot more depth and theory and provides resources on how teams can work together to create really sound, really good, really meaningful IEPs that are implemented really well as well. And then there's you see that discussion tool that kind of bridges those two, that helps. It's a tool that helps that conversation along, helps IEP teams have that conversation. So those resources are in development and will be done very soon and ready for the next school year. This is a timeline for implementation of many of those improvement strategies that I just talked about. So the procedural compliance self-assessment, you'll see in the 15-16 school year, it was kind of a pilot year. Next year, the 16-17 school year, if there's anybody on from a district on the call, we will not be doing the procedural compliance self-assessment per se next year. It's really a year for training on these new materials and this new process, and then implementing the new materials and process in the 17-18 school year. For determinations, and that's, again, when we provide, these are the ones that DPI provides to districts. Last year, for last year's data, we still focused on compliance as we had in the past, but we forecast with districts that we were going to be shifting to phase in outcomes within our determinations of districts. So for this year's data, we're going to use 90% compliance data and 10% results data. For the 2016-17 school year, 75% compliance, 25% results. For the 17-18 school year, that's when we'll be at full implementation of 50 and 50. For the coordinated improvement planning process, and this was that first improvement strategy, we're working very closely with the CISEP Center, which is the State Implementation and Scaling Up of Evidence-Based Practices Center. It really just rolls right off the tongue, which is a national OSEP-funded center to help states with sound implementation. So often what happens is when a state or a school or a district or any entity, and this research actually stems from medical research and that's now being applied to educational research, we often concentrate on the intervention or innovation, but we don't concentrate on the implementation of that new innovation. So this center is helping us focus on sound implementation, and then we're in turn providing these supports to regional entities, districts, etc., as they're implementing new practices. There's a lot of research behind this that shows that using these principles and frameworks leads to much better outcomes and much better sustainability of new practices implemented. So we're really excited about that. So we're using that over the next couple of years. So this year has been kind of a design process, still in that designing phase. Next year we'll be kind of finishing up that design phase and beginning some piloting, and then the 17-18 school year continuing piloting and initial implementation. And that will be for the supports provided to the districts in a regional fashion. Okay, so some of the things that we've been talking to districts about for preparing for implementation are engaging families. So here's where some of the things that we've been talking to districts about around engaging families are having conversations around those, what are meaningful, so going back to that flyer around college and career readiness, what are meaningful knowledge, skills, and habits to be infused within not only the IEPs, but also the programming? What are the North Stars for families? What are the cultural beliefs and family values that programming can help, that effective programming can help reach? Being sure that families are really connected to the new college and career ready IEP process as well. So I encourage families, as these materials become available on our website, to become familiar with those. For example, the present level of achievement, clearly articulating where a student is related to grade level standards-based curriculum and instruction. What are meaningful goals related to disability needs, disability-related needs? What are services that would be very meaningful to help bridge that gap between where a student currently is and where we want him or her to be by the end of the school year. And then, of course, this increased focus on literacy. So a number of things to just kind of be thinking about. Continuous monitoring of student progress data and adjusting instruction. So this comes back to that multi-level system of support where we're continuously gathering data on how students are achieving both academically, behaviorally, etc. And then in a just-in-time fashion, adjusting instruction and programming so that we're continually meeting the needs of students where they are. Assurance of high-quality, standards-based curriculum and instruction, so really having high expectations and making sure that programming is continually linked to those grade-level, high-quality standards for both curriculum and instruction. Facilitation of collaboration between educators. So again, this goes back to this isn't about changing special education or changing general education alone. This is truly about a collaborative effort for everybody to own the education of every student and make that commitment that every student can and will learn. This is a continuation, so again, infusion of cultural responsiveness, that we are truly reaching all students. Implementation of universal design for learning, I talked about that a little bit earlier. Adoption of practices from the Promoting Excellence for All effort. This is a bank of strategies that are on the DPI website, specifically that address race-based patterns of success and strategies for reaching students of color. Some really great strategies outlined in those resources, as well as some newly created e-modules. Usage of multi-level systems of support, and I've talked about that a number of times now. That's our response to intervention and positive behavioral interventions and support. So some resources to kind of be familiar with. These are not special education specific, which is why I like to bring them in here. And these are all linkable. These are, for example, the first one is Guiding Principles of Teaching and Learning. So again, I like to say these are for all students. For example, also this portrait of a literate individual. This isn't a portrait of some individuals. This is a portrait of a literate individual. There isn't a separate one for students with disabilities. This is what a portrait of a literate individual looks like, and these are Wisconsin created resources. So these are nice materials to become familiar with, to have discussions with school staff about, to kind of, it's a nice, I think, conversation starter with educators because you can kind of gauge, you can kind of get on the same page and calibrate your beliefs around literacy in general and where your child might be related to some of these materials and how the supports that your child might need to progress in some of these materials. So I like to use those as kind of foundational conversation starters. And some additional resources. These are mostly around the standards. So I continually have been talking about standards-based instruction, and these are resources largely around those resources. Okay, so I think that brings me to my last slide, which is perfect. I was hoping for about 15 minutes at the end. Are there, Bonnie, have we received any questions in the chat?
I don't have any at this time.
Anybody have any questions or comments or things you've been wondering about?
I have one, Julia, that maybe can start some conversation, especially if we have some parents on the telephone. Questions that we've had in the past is, how can a parent get involved in RDA in their school district? How should they approach people? How can they learn more? What would be some of your suggestions?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think right now we're at the point where there are probably school staff that are just beginning to hear about this. We're still in this initial phase. I think that administrators are well aware of it, but there might be some teachers that are less aware. So I think that it's really about having conversations about achievement for your child, particularly in the area of literacy. So I would, again, I like to use the resources on this page to talk about, when we're talking about reading in particular or literacy in particular, here's the notions that I have about where I want my child to be. What are your thoughts on that? How are the strategies that we're using right now going to achieve the vision that we've set out in my child's IEP? How are the strategies going to get us there? So I think that beginning the conversation, having the conversation center on achievement and the types of things that are important to you, as well as the standards that they have to reach for a specific grade level, because that's what this is really all about. Yeah, there are some accountability features within RDA. There are, going to be requirements of districts. But ultimately, when we're talking about individual students, we're talking about achievement, greater levels of achievement, particularly in the area of reading. So I think that the conversations really focus there on the type of programming, the high expectations, the settings in which the child is being educated in, the supports that are available, the connections to the general education curriculum and instruction, that kind of thing. So kind of really boiling it down to achievement when we're talking about individual kiddos.
Hey, thank you. Mm-hmm. Any other questions for Julia at this time? Julia, I don't have any other questions that are appearing in my question box right now. So if you want.
And I am always available afterwards if you'd like to. I say that, and now I'm going to actually be on maternity leave for a few months, but you can certainly reach out to us here at the department. There are lots of people that would be very willing to answer follow-up questions, provide additional supports, provide updates. So please feel free to reach out. That's what we're here for. We're going to be putting lots more resources up on our RDA webpage. So be looking for those.
Okay. Well, at this time, I'd like to thank you, Julia, for your presentation so much, and I'd like to say thank you to everybody who has joined us. This concludes our webinar for today. Please be reminded that Wisconsin FACETS has over 100 scheduled trainings and webinars for 2016, and we invite you to please check out our website calendar and register for any upcoming trainings that you think would be appropriate and interesting to you. Please watch for the short evaluation coming your way soon, and to all of you that joined us today, have a great day.